Welcome everybody to the Network Plumbing Working Group meeting for Thursday, July 30th, 2020. And Doug, I believe you have the first agenda item.
All right, cool. So this is related to the current suite of changes that I've got for the governance document. So thanks everybody for the last round of comments. They were very helpful. I spent some time with Josh Burkus, who's also a Red Hatter, but he is involved in the CNCF governance working group. So he was able to look at this with me, and I took another pass given some of his comments as well. Kind of the big change is that I tried to use this kind of new structure where I said, all right, here's how we define how you become a member, and here's how you become a maintainer of code in the group, so that we could kind of simplify and use those constructs herein. So that's kind of the overall gist. However, there are some specifics where I think we can, where I really need input from the group. These are things that I'm like, I could try to propose something, but really needs input. Especially, there's a new section in here that's section D, that's meetings and voting. And I really wanted some input on how we want to define quorum. And another place that probably needs some more, group think on is how we approve pull requests. That's kind of the gist. If there's been some recent comments, I apologize. I haven't gotten to take another pass through comments in just over 2 days, I think. So just an FYI.
Any discussion points for Doug's proposal?
Well, it makes me really happy that no one's yelling and screaming at me right now. So that's probably a good sign.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting at this point that we don't really know what quorum looks like because we don't really have a formal list of membership.
And I guess, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah,
I think I asked this probably like 2 or 3 months ago when we were before all this came up, when we were voting on something, and I think I asked what it meant anyway. So it's kind of, it seemed to be working as it was, but I think some of this formalization may be good.
Yeah, and also the representation and involvement in this group has changed over time, as it does for most projects. There's been a couple core people that have been around for a while, and then other contributors come and contribute, go off, do something else for a little bit, perhaps come back. So it'd be interesting to explore, are you still a member if you don't have any contributions, or you don't come to a meeting for a year or something like that? Do you still get a vote at that point? And then, in terms of quorum, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I'm going to make a quick note in the membership section to have some idea of like a timeout.
Yeah, like how do you, not get demoted or kicked, but it just seems like there should be some kind of, not timeout, but expiration date or something like that. Maybe even more importantly for maintainers.
All right, cool. I made a quick note there. I think that's a good one to have there. So, we have a way to say, you need to have some type of active participation in a recent time frame.
Yeah, so I'm reading through that section again now, and I do see that, because I mean, I don't think I've made any contributions upstream to Multis, but I've been attending these meetings, so I guess trying to figure out what it means to be a member.
And so, Billy, for example, just to give a quick example of how I tried to define at least member, whereas I guess maintainer is a little bit different, but
Yeah.
for example, I tried to say with a member, to become a member, you need to have some documented interaction. So like, for example, in your case, with the device ID stuff, I could show, hey, Billy has been an active participant by this documentation over the period of the last 3 months. And I mean, I know just from knowing that you've been involved for a long time, but it would be really easy to show in that particular case, just as an example.
Right. So do we need to add like a one-liner to the agenda, like attendees for each meeting, just as a, because I may not bring something up in the meeting, so I may not have like a Doug in brackets governance document section in the agenda, but I was here and maybe I talked, but my name doesn't show up anywhere in the agenda. So.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know what? I think an attendees, a like roll call kind of thing, I think is really good. And then that way, for example, the way I have it written is like you need to have a documented thing in the agenda, and we don't want necessarily people to populate the agenda with frivolous stuff just to show that they're in there. Yeah. All right, cool. I'll add a comment about that.
So I mean, I don't know if you need to put it in there, but maybe in the, I mean, I wouldn't put it in the governance document, but in the agenda document, maybe as a bullet item at the top that says, for like the attendees, it's kind of up to you to put your name in there. Because I know for the SRV community meeting, I started adding attendees, and then honestly, I would have trouble finding people's names, I don't necessarily know everyone, so I tried my best to put them in there. And always at the end, you could always say, hey, make sure you update it. But I think it would be up to the individual, make sure their name's on the attendee list. So I don't think it needs to be in the governance, but maybe just a note in the agenda document on how the agenda document works to say, if you want to prove you're a member, it's up to you to put your name in or something like that.
Yeah, that works for me, because then the
perfect,
person who's taking notes, which we don't have a designated note taker or anything, but even so, whoever's taking notes doesn't have to go scrape the list of attendees and monitor for changes and that kind of thing.
Right. Someone joins late or something, it's up to them to add their name. So kind of a question. So we're talking about moving the SRV underneath the network plumbing working group, but the SRV has its own meeting. So does that meeting count as like a maintainer for that particular repo, like repo under the network plumbing working group repo, or how does that work? Do they need to come to this meeting as well, or it's just kind of under this governance? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
So, I mean, I think that it's completely reasonable that if you've got a particular project of a big enough scope that you need to have a maintainers meeting, that, participation could be gauged based on, those meeting notes as well. Maybe I can make a note here about maybe in the maintainer section saying, you know, also whatever project specific notes or something like that, or
Yeah, I don't want to
no.
overly complicate it, but if, you know, I'm like becoming a member and distributing, you know, showing that you've either put code in or you're attending meetings. So if I'm only attending the SRV meeting, like let's say Abdul, for example, he's only going to the SRV meetings. He's not necessarily coming to this one. He should still have his rights under the SRV repo. Or is that too
Me, I'm
much? I
just
mean, I'm
trying to
just,
take a look at it. I guess in part, you know what, I guess there's part of me that thinks that there's this, I kind of leave some wiggle room here where I say stuff like, here's our usual ways that you interact. And then I say, to become a member, one must have demonstrated contributions to the group, documented in the meeting agenda, GitHub, or any other place where contribution is possible.
that's, yeah, something like that maybe, you know. And then do we say it's, you know, it's subject to the maintainers to decide membership, or, you know, I guess it gets to the end, you have some vote and, you know, you're trying to determine who has membership. Is it up to the maintainers to decide if someone has a voting right because they attended one meeting, or?
So, yeah, so, and I guess important distinction here is that we've got becoming a member, right? And right now it says demonstrated contribution to the group. And I think that we can, you know, make that a little more distinct with the like attendees, as you mentioned. And so anyone who's a member, so basically right now the way it reads is you have demonstrated contributions to the group, and then you ask to become a member, and basically anyone with voting rights can reject a proposal to become a member, but the default is if nobody rejects, you become a member, then you have the right to vote.
Okay.
And then further from that, then there's the other role, which is maintainer, and you have to be a member first to become a maintainer. And then same kind of rules as well. So it's like you add your name to the agenda, you propose that you want to be a maintainer of X, Y, and Z. And then basically the gist is, I guess this is so right now I have it saying that you would become a maintainer accepted as by majority vote. But there's part of me that likes this kind of, you get it by default if nobody disagrees.
Yeah.
There's part of me that likes that. So maybe I should just copy the same kind of pattern here.
Yeah, that's probably good.
That.
So does that mean we're going to have an official list of members? So when voting time comes, we, like, is it in the agenda, or is it a separate document that, because the agenda is open, so anyone can just go in and edit it, I guess. So is there a separate document, or it could probably be in both, but there's an official one that only maintainers have right access to, or something?
I'm going to make a stub here to define where our members document it.
Okay.
And I'm happy to take any suggestions there. There's part of me that says, hey, the agenda is good, although it's a like publicly editable document. So
well, it also has a history.
I guess doesn't sound great. Maybe it's,
you can't erase the history, so you can always
yeah,
look at
that's
the history
true.
to see if, you know, I don't remember John being a member, and you go look and he'd added his own name somewhere in the history. So, I mean, I think with the history, you may be okay just to put it in the agenda document.
Yeah, it's not like a deleter on an FTP site in 1998. So, you know, there's that. All right. right. So I guess along this agenda item, definitely looking for any further ways to improve this doc. But something I guess that's worth covering right now is kind of the impetus for this documentation, which is creating the appropriate repository or repositories for the SRLV, CNI, and device plugins, and whatever auxiliary tooling. Is this something that we want to start working on? I know last meeting we did determine that we could go in parallel with creating those repositories while we work towards this governance.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if everybody broadly agrees with the governance, then we can use, that to inform those repositories and who gets to be maintainer of them. Are there any other repos than SRIOV at this point that we're ready to move over?
As far as I'm aware, it's just SRLV, and I'm not sure if all of the components are necessary there, but
Right. Is it CNI and device plugin right now, or the two that are coming over?
that's the way I understand it. And when I had talked to Zheng Hui, who's one of the active participants of SRLV CNI device plugin, those were the two that he brought up. So that's the one I know, and I've been in touch with Intel as well about this. I am not sure if there's anyone from Intel on the call today. Sometimes I think they have conflicts here, so anyways, the Intel interaction that I had, they are willing and happy to move forward on this, and they're just figuring it out, whatever internals they have to figure out on their side. And at least the way I understood it is their internals was repository by repository. So they currently have whatever they need to do for the CNI plugin, and I made them aware it also needs to be the device plugin. So they're doing whatever they need to do, but and I bring that up only because I think that it's important to have a diverse set of organizations contributing to the project. So hopefully we can retain their contributorship along with everybody else. But I think the bottom line is these are open source projects. We can fork them and create repos at any time that, as members of this group, that we're ready to go ahead with that, and Intel can asynchronously do what they need to do to ensure their contribution.
Yeah, that sounds good. Have you talked to Zhongwei about like when that would be a good time? For example, do they want to like set a tag or a label so that when they move it, that we know where, after like release, I have to look at the release schedule, or the release numbering, but after a particular release, that is the time we want to fork, or are we just going to pick it up midstream and move it?
And so Billy, I think that you've hit on something really important, is that we need the SRLV, CNI, and device plugin domain experts to get the details there, which I only have kind of at a high level, to be honest.
Yeah, so that's fine. I guess we have the meeting on Monday, so I will bring it up there and see. I mean, I'm active in that
Billy,
sense that I go to. I'm active in the sense I go to the meetings, but I'm not a huge contributor. I'm doing it more from the VDPA point of view. So it will have to sync up with Zongwei and Abdul and see what they think.
Okay, let me see if I can make it to that call too, and I can bring. I mean, also you're just as capable of getting that. Yeah, Philly. Actually, since you usually make it to that meeting, maybe you can just let us know about that outcome to see if there's any specific date or release or whatever that they're ready to move ahead with that.
Yeah, I can do that.
Sweet, thank you. All right, cool. So at least from my perspective, that covers what I wanted to cover with the governance doc and then the repository move. I have the next item on the agenda. Any other comments before I move on to that?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the other repos that are currently under the Kubernetes Network Plumbing Working Group GitHub. Are those like automatically? Do they join automatically this governance model, or is it going to be another group of repos?
I think that's an awesome question, and I think what I would propose is that we would put those repos basically through the same process that we have that we would agree on. So that, like, say for example, I'm just going to use the reference deployments repo as an example. So at least currently the way that that's worked is it's basically been Tomo and I taking care of it. And I guess what we would do is we'd put it on the agenda and we'd say, reference deployments, does this match our mission statement? Do we accept these maintainers as that repository? So I think it would give us an opportunity to go through what we currently have, ensure that it matches the mission statement, and that we accept the maintainers as it currently stands. That's what I would propose, at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe even we could start with those if the CNI and the device plugin need more time to figure out their schedule with regards to maybe releases or anything. Maybe we could use those ones as beta testing the process.
I love it. Yeah, I think all the better if, this is something I feel like we're awesome at with this group, is to come up with a process, apply it, and then use that as feedback. Adrian, I think that's a great way to do it. Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. Any other input here before the next one?
Do we have anywhere that says, so I think the governance doc said that we were going to put like a code of conduct or whatever into each repo. Should we have a little bit more guidance around have a maintainers file and list maintainers in the repo and actually have a more formal idea of, who the maintainers for each repo are?
That's an awesome call. Let me make a note here in the doc, because I think that, let's see,
And also
might even need a section.
Well, corresponding to that, are we going to have anything that says, here's a list of members, I guess. Maybe that was covered in the doc and I just didn't see it, but how do we actually record official membership as well?
Yeah, and so Billy brought this up briefly, and I put a stub in about the list of members. But yeah, that definitely also needs to be like an official list of
I see that now.
maintainers.
Yeah. I think we said that probably the agenda document was okay to have that list since we have a history in there. So people, if someone were to magically just put their name in there, you could look at the history. If, I mean, it'd be up to us to recognize that and say, hey, that guy, I don't remember him showing up, but I think we said the agenda document may be a good place for it.
Well, I mean, that's a good place for recording each meeting and stuff like that. But I'm wondering if we should have like an official list of members, since the agenda doc would just show who showed up to a given meeting.
And that's fine too. I think that's part of what Doug was, where our members documented. One of the suggestion was the agenda doc, and I guess I was thinking like at the top above the, the weekly meetings, not necessarily in the weekly meetings in themselves, but up above an official section that would change. But if you want another document that's read only to the world and only is read write to the maintainers, I think that would be acceptable too.
Yeah, I mean, we could put it in something like the community repo as well. Have a, like where the all the official docs and governance policy and stuff like that is. You could just put it there as well. So, okay. Working group status, Doug?
Yep. Yeah, so the next one here, hopefully this is a fairly short item, but generally the gist is when I was talking to Josh from our open source program office at Red Hat, he, he's asking about the history of the group, and, I explained, and I'm like, well, we've kind of been off on our own. It had, I think some interest was generated initially through SIG Network, but we've kind of been our own, splinter cell, if you will. And Josh said, hey, it's not really a big deal to become an official working group. And essentially, the way that I understood the process, and maybe I can get some more clarification from Josh, but the gist was that to become an official Kubernetes working group, basically what we would do is we would take a representative from SIG Network who would appear at a CNCF technical oversight committee meeting, and they would propose, hey, we'd like to be a working group. And essentially all that the technical oversight committee would have to do is not say no, and then bam, you're a working group. So in terms of the benefits or non-benefits of that is Josh thinks that that would be a nice path forward for us potentially getting repositories in as part of the CNCF, as he additionally described that the requirements for a sandbox project under the CNCF have loosened greatly over the last couple months. And it's like the way I understood it is that previously you needed to have some kind of trajectory that was towards, like a GA style release. I'm not super familiar with all the different levels of sandbox, incubating, graduated, etc. But I think that you needed to have like a trajectory towards graduated, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. So he thought that that might be a good step forward that way. I know that Mike from IDM was concerned about this before, and I think that it may be nice to have that framework and to have another set of governance to fall back on. Although he did say that working group status doesn't necessarily come with any out of the box governance. So this effort that we have ongoing would actually be will still be useful for us. So I wanted to bring that up and see how people felt about that, and then maybe think about the possibility of the next steps along that one, which may be me getting more clarification from Josh.
I think it's probably a good idea to restart these kinds of discussions around becoming a more formal group. CNCF seems like a good option. I had just dropped a note in there wondering about CNCF versus Kubernetes, of course, understanding that Kubernetes is already a project of the CNCF. But the other possibility we had discussed in the past every now and again and never gotten around to investigating was official Kubernetes working group, which has a different set of definitions and entry criteria and things like that. This group has been mostly Kubernetes focused in the past, so maybe that's something to explore as well. But, you know, I mean, CNCF and Kubernetes are all part of the same big happy family.
I personally would be either happy with either route there. And I think that it would be easy to make a case on either side of it. And I mean, I agree, we have had a lot of Kubernetes focus, but we also have a lot of CNI expertise in this group, and CNI is intrinsically not Kubernetes specific, right? So
yep.
I think it'd be easy to make the argument either way. Let me try to get some more clarification from Josh on the process for one versus the other.
Yeah, maybe get his opinion on that too, if he has one. The other thing is that, like, the annotation namespace that we've chosen was explicitly under, I mean, what is it, like cni.cncf.io or something like that. So we've already sort of made some decisions around where the project is namespaced, even if they weren't explicit at the time.
Yeah, I think that does kind of speak to the like breadth that we were trying to cover with this as well, for sure. All right, so I'll get Josh's opinion. I'll get any clarifications on the process, and then maybe from there, then we can figure out the next steps for how we want to handle that proposal to the Technical Oversight Committee. Does that sound like a reasonable next step, folks?
Works for me.
All right, cool. Nice. Yeah, that covers it for me, unless there's any other questions.
Nope. All right, over to Tomo.
Okay. So currently, as you know, I'm working on the Macbeth network policy, which implements the network policy for Malthus interface. So that the component utilizes the IP tables in the pod namespace side, and then these stuff. So this means IP table is not only used in the Mac VLAN. IP VLAN, of course, uses and the virtual Ethernet, I mean the point-to-point CNI plugin, and the bridge CNI also works with the IP tables. So I named the wrong component for that actually. So that this should be the not the Mac VLAN, not only for Mac VLAN. So I'm just thinking about the changing the repository name and also the in the code to Malthus network policy. So currently this the component is pretty incubation phase, so then they are not so major stuff. So I'm just thinking it should be okay. But also I'm just double check with other guys and then you folks. Doug, what about
Hey Tomo, what
multi-net?
about calling it multi-net network policy, possibly? I'm
Yeah.
also okay with calling it multi, but
Hey,
just as a food for thought.
does it specifically rely on the Multis implementation of the plumbing spec, or is it agnostic?
Not the multi-specific. I only related to the network attachment definition.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, maybe the multi-net network policy, or yeah, maybe the multi-net network policy could be the feasible. Okay, so I'm going to the changing.
I'm just typing some other possibilities in the document. I mean, if anybody has any better suggestions, go right ahead.
I really like multi-net policy. It's less redundant. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Net is the a little bit. So the I'm. If you do not mind, I'm thinking about this stuff, and then I'm going to change it the next week. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the multi-network policy could be the candidate, because the multi-net network policy is a little bit hard to say.
It's true.
Yeah. No,
couldn't agree more.
Tomo, I do like that you're changing it, because I was a little confused that when it said Mac VLAN, if it was strictly Mac VLAN and wasn't more generic solution. So I do like the fact that you're changing it, and I agree that probably Multis shouldn't be in there, even though I'm horrible at names, and I would have come up with something similar. So
yep. Yep, got it. Thank you for your comment. Okay, that's it. So next is Adrian.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for you, Tomo. So is this network policy specific to IP tables? And if we were to envision another way to enforce network policies, would that be implemented in this network policy, in this project, or would it be like another kind of another network policy plugged into Multis, for example?
This is a good question. So currently the multi-network policy utilizing the IP table, but of course I'm also targeting as the next candidate as the eBPF or some other stuff, the eBPF, and then maybe some specific stuff for the PDKLD stuff. Anyway, at that time, should we implement another component, or should we put the eBPF code into the multi-network policy? This is a pretty trade-off, you know. So adding the several feature in the one component, this makes the insanely complex stuff, you know. If you see the kube proxy, we can easily see the one example, you know, the IP tables and the LBM, then so that this makes it very complicated and hard to maintain. So I have the still questions about the whether I should implementing the in current component or creating the another component only for the eBPF network policy. So this, and then of course if someone is thinking about utilizing the TC offloading for the network policy, maybe this could be the candidate, but I don't know yet. So the answer your question?
Yeah. So yeah, my question was, so if the implementation is going to be tied to the component because of the reasons that you have stated, then you could put it into the name, I guess, or maybe not. And if there is another implementation in the future, rename it or I don't know.
Yeah. So the yeah. So currently, I'm the yeah. I'd like to keep this stuff as the question, because the yeah. So currently, of course, we only have the one implementation, and then the maybe the once we implement the another implementation or eBPF for this stuff, and then the I'd like to think about it again.
That makes sense.
Yep. Thanks.
All right. Device identification proposal.
Okay, so it's my turn. So I've put a link there to the document. I did a bit of cleanup, and I put a changelog at the beginning of the document to ease the review. So what has changed since the last meeting is we have tried to simplify the paths in order to make sure that the file cleaning is easier. So the old path, where the device files were going to be stored, was basically a directory hierarchy. Like, for example, a device plugin would create a directory with the resource name, and then a subdirectory with the device ID, and then and then just a file. So that hierarchy, it's cleaner to see in the file system, but it's not as easy to then do some kind of garbage collection because of the different levels. So the current proposal is to have a more flat file system hierarchy. So we would have like a base directory for the device plugin and another base directory for the CNI, and all the files will be in that directory. And the name of the file will be composed of the resource name and device ID, the same way that they're used to, but instead of using directories, just using the file name. That makes it cleaner that makes it a bit easier to keep clean. So that's one of the changes. Any comments on this?
I wasn't clear on what the reason was for having two different directories. Like the
yeah. So I didn't go into that. That is one of the comments that we have pending to resolve. So yeah, we can okay. I guess
we can discuss on the doc too if you want. That's fine. We got 10 minutes left, so I don't want to take that time up if doing it in the doc is fine. Okay,
I really don't mind. And now that it's flat, everything is flat. It's even it is maybe it makes more sense to have just one directory for everything. But we can discuss it in the document.
Sure.
So another change, and that I would like to get your feedback about is putting this directory, instead of in var/var/run, moving it to /run. The reason is that in most distributions, /run is tempfs. So that means that because one of the problems here is on the CNIs that create the files, they delete the files when they are called when the pod is deleted, but that might not happen, for example, when there is a crash in the node and the node unexpectedly is rebooted. In that case, if the directory we're using is backed by a storage that is persistent, then we would be leaving files behind, and that would be complicated to clean. We would need some kind of garbage collector, booting up before anything else, and it makes it complicated. If we move it to a tempfs, then we don't have that problem. And since this is inherently dynamic, I guess it makes sense. So what do you think?
At least on Fedora and RHEL, var run is basically a symlink to run anyway. So I'm not sure that like the difference between var run or just /run makes a difference on those platforms. But I think it's the other thing we can do is say that this directory should be cleaned up by the implementation or something on reboot. And that could be through like a tempfiles.d file. It could be a mount point that is on a tempfs or something like that. I don't know if we want to necessarily specify here exactly how that is done, but at least if we intend that behavior, then we can strongly suggest that the implementation make sure that these things are cleaned up in the right way, and here are a couple of ways that you could do that.
Okay, yes, that makes perfect sense. So just leave it as a suggestion or as a recommendation, and let the implementation. Because you're right. There are many ways to do this. You can,
Yeah, and that's just my thought. If anybody else have thoughts or suggestions there.
So does that mean we would leave it at like var run and just suggest that it's up to them to clean up? Is that what which I'm fine with.
I think that's what we make Podman do.
I think that works for me.
Okay, cool.
Okay, perfect. So then I've also added a section which is the modifications that we would have to add to the network plumbing working group spec. And they are at the bottom of this document, and I've tried to make them as spec-ish as possible. So please have a look. And with regards to the comments, I've put 2 links there to the current open comments. One of them is the one that you've mentioned, Dan, about the directory. So if you agree, if we all agree that we can put everything under the same directory and just ensure that the name of the files don't clash, then yeah, we can put all of them into the same directory. Anyone has any thoughts on this?
I mean, is there any possibility of both things writing the same file? Like, I don't think so. But if we do put them in the same directory, is it worth adding something about, what do you do if there's already a file in that directory that may or may not have been written by you?
Yeah, so there, the document is written in a way that should ensure that for the CNIs, there is no name clash, and for the device plugins, there is no name clash. But whether there is a possible conflict between a device plugin and a CNI, that is not. I did not have that in mind, but I think it's very rare. I'll give it another thought, but if in any case it would be as simple as doing the same thing and replacing the directory with a file name that is composed of DP and then the resource name and the device ID, and for the CNIs, CNI hyphen the network name and the whatever, and that would keep those collisions away in the same way, and have the same flat directory. So I think we're good.
Okay.
I don't think it's very problematic. Okay, so I'll change that, and I will clear up that, resolve that comment. The last comment I have is with regards to the Network Plumbing Working Group spec modifications, and I found that there is no reference to the resource name annotation. This resource name annotation is very widely used, or at least for the CNI device plugin for the SRIOV device plugin and CNI, and at least Multus, which is the implementation that I have looked at a bit. It has this mechanism of dynamically injecting the device ID, reading it from the kubelet resource API. So all this process, including the resource annotation, there is no reference to that in the spec. It would be, so in order to write these spec modifications properly and clearly, I would have to make reference to that. So is there anywhere where this is documented or specified somehow? Or should we put it into the Network Plumbing Working Group spec?
I think, and also we don't have got a minute or so left. I think it's kind of a close call between whether it goes into the plumbing working group spec or whether it's a separate document by itself. I think it depends on whether that would be cleaner, whether it'd be easier to update that spec. However, then that spec could change independently of the plumbing working group spec, and how do you make sure that implementations are compatible with both? So I think there's an argument for both ways. As long as it's not that complicated, it might be good to try adding a section to the plumbing spec to lay out at least the JSON format of the files. I mean, we can always take a look and see what that looks like and make a decision on that.
Was it consciously left out before, or is it just something that never went in, or?
It just kind of never went in because we didn't really have substantive discussions around it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can try to write it up, and we can discuss it in the next meeting. See if it is too much, and we should have it an independent document, or if it's good enough to put it into the spec. I can do that, and we can discuss it next time.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for all your continued work on it, by the way.
Sure.
All right, we are out of time. So see everybody next time in 2 weeks.
Yep. All right. See everyone.
Well,
Yep.
Yep. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.